Hi everyone, Simon Jacobson here for another episode of Meaningful Live. Are all political leaders corrupt? Is the question. Brings a smile to my face, I'm sure to many of us, but also can bring a few tears as well. This program is dedicated by Derek Mortland in loving memory of his grandfather, Rondell Wright. He was a loving, humorous, and caring soul. So you could think of this as a tongue-in-cheek question, but it's actually a question that I've heard from many people, and they've submitted and suggested that I speak about it. Are all political leaders corrupt? Now, I have not met every political leader on earth, so personally I cannot testify and say, yes, every one of them is corrupt. And yet, the very question tells us that that's how we think of leaders. Not necessarily that they're born corrupt, and not necessarily that they began as corrupt people. Many began probably for very good intentions, for the public good, service, but it lends itself, and that's essentially what the question implies, leadership lends itself to negotiation, to compromise, to maneuvering, manipulation, and that begins the borderline, and then you cross over first a thin line, and then perhaps crossing over more, what we would call full outright corruption. Now, corruption itself is a very broad word, and I'm not here to accuse anybody. We do live in hopefully a due process justice system. So anyone accused of corruption always has the right to be presumed innocent. So this is not a court and jury coming to accuse anyone or prosecute anyone. But we can talk about it as people because we definitely have a crisis of leadership. Do we trust our leaders? Do we trust our leaders? And there may have been a time where people did trust leaders, but there's always a measure of skepticism when people are in power. What do they say? Absolute power brings to absolute corruption. So good, we do have checks and balances in our system, but the checks and balances have also been proven to be quite faulty. Very many times the watchdogs that were meant to watch, they themselves need watchdogs. And we've seen this time and again. And it really comes down to one very basic rule. Human beings are driven by self-interest. Self-interest, when it's not checked, and when someone feels they can get away with it, will lead to behavior that's greedy, narcissistic, at the expense of others, even with all the justifications, and sometimes there may be legitimate justifications, but basically it comes down to my understanding of things. And even if it isn't purely self-interest, it's a subjective perspective that's you. So officially in this government of the United States was meant to be a true democracy, where you have representation of the people, you have representation of different interests. They come together in the three branches of our government. I'm talking about the United States now, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, and they negotiated, give and take. Many instances it's worked very well. But then when we start hearing stories that are exposed of people doing something outright illegal, or borderline illegal, then we ask ourselves, are they the only ones, or they're the only ones that were caught? And how many others have gotten away with it? Because it lends itself, when you're in that type of position, to be able to get away with things. Can we have an absolute airtight control of checks and balances that would not allow for any corruption? It's not humanly possible, because we are human beings. And the watchdogs can be bribed, and they can be biased, and they can be prejudiced. And time and again, this is not a theory, we've seen it play itself out. So the question really is, can you really trust? Who do we really trust? Can we trust leaders? Leaders who have come to power, leaders who have decisions to make that can affect millions, if not billions of dollars, that serve their own interest and other people's interest. Maybe another way of putting it is there such a thing as selflessness, as a selfless leader? So the leader I always look to Whenever you think of the quintessential epitome of leadership, Moses of the Bible. And how is he described? He's described as the humblest man that walked on earth. Moses the shepherd. They call it the loyal shepherd, the faithful shepherd. Shepherd of the people, dedicated to their interests, not his own. Is that humanly possible to expect today? Because when you look around, most people who are leaders, if not all, their leadership usually came actually with being the opposite of humble. Having a healthy ego, ambition, determination, drive, which often comes with sometimes stepping on others. Again, always good intentions, even if it's good intentions. It comes with people who are wealthy, or able to raise a lot of money, have ego, have charisma, presence. You don't usually hear the word humility when you think of leaders. You hear humility as a beautiful virtue, but not in leadership. Leadership, if you're too humble, you become like a doormat, a pushover. But there's a big difference between humility and a pushover. A pushover is someone, or somebody has a low self-esteem. When we talk about Moses, it wasn't low self-esteem. He was very aware of his great qualities, but he always understood there was something greater than himself that blessed him with these gifts, and that if someone else was blessed with these gifts, they may have done better than he. The second thing, the humility of knowing I have a job to do to serve others. So let's address that. Look, if you take a psychological Freudian, Darwinian, classical approach to human psyche, then the id, or social Darwinism, the selfish gene, in the words of Richard Dawkins, and is the driving force. Me, and my needs. Yes, we can have intelligence, coexistence. We superimpose a form of green lights and red lights to coexist. But survival of the fittest is the driving ethos. And when you apply that to individuals, it means a leader may serve well, but it's also going to be because of his own interest. And then when there are conflicts of interests, we know what can happen. So it really comes down to understanding the human being. Can we expect a person to truly be a selfless leader? Where he puts himself aside or herself aside for the good of others? So I would like to believe the answer is yes. But the fact remains that many of these type of people who are really pure at heart and sincere and committed to others and are ready to sacrifice their own self-interest for another, not only are they rare, but they're even rarer to become leaders. Who would want to go into politics? Who would want to go into that world where even if you are pure and clean and sincere, people around you can be corrupt? Very hard to swim with sharks and not behave like one. Who would want to go there? So we all begin with our idealism. Just think back when you were a younger man or a younger woman. We all were idealistic, but then life takes over. A disappointment, that naive sense of truth and justice, you suddenly realize, 1 second. As one big attorney once told me, he says, there's no justice in the courts. The one with the most of the money and the most persistence, the one who'll stick it through, is the one that's usually going to win. Now, is that an absolute statement? There's no justice at all? Again, we don't like absolutes. But it's interesting how people who've gone through experience, that's what they end up feeling, jaded, throw in the towel. That idealism becomes something, a distant memory of more innocent times. Children have that type of idealism. However, I wouldn't consider myself a child, chronologically at least. And I do want to maintain within myself the belief that there are people like that. And you always hold out that when will that so-called selfless, now I will call that person a spiritual type of leader, a visionary, rise to the occasion. They're rare. It's rare, especially in today's day and age. But is it something that's impossible? I don't think so. The question is, can we demand it? Can we push it? Because at the end of the day, it's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. Because we do have elected officials. That's the good news. But the problem is those that are electing them equally have either the cynicism or the partisanships, or especially recently the polarization that comes through all that's going on the last years. So you think back in times pre-Watergate, as some like to put it, the innocent times, so to speak, of JFK. Today we know that there was corruption and there was self-interest and there was all kinds of pollutants and toxins going on there just as much as today. The only thing was, it was known that the media left the presidents alone. They left elected officials alone. It was like the big secret nobody spoke about. Something like back in the Victorian age. We didn't speak about our sins. We didn't speak about our indiscretions. We didn't speak about our transgressions. That didn't make them less, it just was not spoken about. So it creates the illusion that things were much purer. There were strong, healthy homes, and there was fidelity and integrity. I didn't live then, so I can't talk about back 100 years ago. Yes, were there some people that had integrity? Yes, but there are today as well. But it's not really the point. The point is that once it did come out, like many said, Watergate. Yes, okay, Watergate was a crime. Was Nixon the first one that transgressed such a crime? Or was he the first one that got caught? Or was he the first one, not only that got caught, that became a whole case in the public, and ultimately the big crime was not just the Watergate break-in, it was the cover-up. Not to minimize it, but also not to think that all the rest were perfect, everybody was doing everything right. Would JFK been able to survive the scrutiny that exists today? He was called the age of Camelot. So we like to believe some of our illusions, some of our dreams. We like to believe the nobility, the purity, the pristine nature of certain leaders. It comes down to it, every leader has its share of vices, and that's fine. They're human beings. The question is the selfless component. So I would like to submit an interesting statement. The statement comes from the Talmud. It says every generation gets the leaders it deserves. We get the leader we deserve. Just amplifying that. You hear the media, when they're accused of providing low common denominator programming and entertainment, they say that's what people want. People say that's what they give us. Advertisers will go wherever people are watching. So what's going on? Is it the blind leading the blind? Are there any standards that we expect, or it keeps on going, whatever will entertain, whatever is titillating, whatever feeds the voyeurism, and you can say the living vicariously through characters? So what we hope for is that people have a conscience, and we hope for that values will somewhere pop up here and there. But I would like to submit that perhaps it's time for a grassroots revolution. That indeed, instead of blaming our leaders, to ask ourselves, what kind of leaders are we electing? What are our standards? So of course, I was just speaking to a young man who's just going to college. He's telling me the pressure he's getting from his parents to go into a certain field which he doesn't want to do. He says, but for their prestige and for they think financially and many other benefits, they think they know better. And we were talking about this. He says, instead of focusing on me being a mensch, a person of values, of integrity, of compassion, of kindness, of virtue, they want me to be this type of business person that they want me to become. And then we complain why our leaders are corrupt. It comes down to what we've considered to be the standards that we're teaching our very children. I think everybody resonates with them that we'd love to bring up beautiful children into this world, meaning giving, virtuous, kind, and so on. Everyone talks about that. But it's not just what you talk about, it's what you do. If we demanded, if we were taught, and we taught, and then demanded that expectations were higher of what a leader is, what do you think would happen? People would be competing for our attention. Now, I know some will say, well, some of us were ready to do that. But the majority of the people, the masses, as we know the poem, the masses are not necessarily equipped to ready to stand up for these highest values. The masses, many of them are driven by their own self-interest. Promise me something, makes me look good. I like the charisma of this person, he looks good on camera. I'll vote for him or her. But perhaps it's time to also re-educate the masses. When I say re-educate, I don't mean anyone has a monopoly on that, but to expose people to what indeed is the standard of a leader. You read the books or the biographies of some great leaders, they always focus that what made the person a great leader, a certain element of humility, a certain element of selflessness. But then you discover the other side of that person. And you start wondering, was it really selfless? And being it's a democracy, we can't impose, but we can educate and we can inspire. So I think of it this way, that the purpose of a program like this, the purpose of our conversation and communication is to higher the standard, to move the needle. We can't control things, but we can put out there a message that there is something more to be expected. No, we're not all dog eats dog, survival of the fittest. We can expect more, and we can demand more. And when there's enough pressure like that, and people in their self-interest want to get elected, and they know that's what they need to live up to, that can change things. I know it may sound a little naive, but I have no doubt that that can happen. And the same thing with the media. The media today has become essentially a slugfest, competing for our attention. Yes, here and there you'll find someone with integrity, someone we trust and respect, but then you see it as they get fired. You see the media is another entertainment industry, let's be honest. But we have control of of the conversation that's going on in our homes, in our families, in our communities. And that's where we need to build upon. As we higher the standard, and that has a ripple effect on others, that becomes a global standard, that's when things will change. I have no doubt that Mr. Putin entered Ukraine because he saw a void of leadership, a vacuum. That's what happens. I'm not getting now into the rights and wrongs of anything here. I'm just talking about the concept. Who would you call a leader that you know, not only do you respect, they have strength of character, they'll stand up for a position. You just don't have it. You have speeches that state it, but you just don't have that behavior. And therefore, what's the alternative when you see that? Maybe corruption or borderline corruption. Because bias and self-interest come into play and they take over. I, for one, feel that I have the voice and the platform to be able to expect and demand something more. And that's where we go back to find a model in our lives. And the truth is the macrocosm is a reflection of the microcosm. Did you have someone in school, in your formative years, that you really felt that you trusted? Someone that helped shape your character? Someone that had that sterling personality, was there for others? Some of us, we know, and you know who you are, have had something like that. So you see it exists. Many have not had. That's a given. I've met enough to know that. But it means it exists out there. I don't know if it's something that comes from birth, from upbringing, or it's something that a person simply makes a choice, that I'm going to be a kinder, gentler person, that I'm not going to give in to my prime instincts of survival and self-interest and survival of the fittest. It's probably a combination of those things. In other words, are true leaders like that made? Is it nurture? Is it nature? Probably a combination. There are people's personality that lend themselves to that. Because it is ultimately a combination of a paradox that we have to deal with. The paradox is that on one hand, humility tends to cause a person, even a strong-willed person, to stand in the background. They don't want to be prominent. They don't need pictures. They don't need the publicity. On the other hand, leadership requires getting out there, taking a position, taking a stand, sometimes fighting for something. So to find that proper mix of humility and also commitment to serve is not so common. But here again, they come from both the same place if you think about it. The humility itself requires that you should say, it's not about me. If there's a need and I have something to offer and to serve, that's the key thing. I once heard a very beautiful line. There was a student in a school, and his master's teacher said to him, his Rebbe said to him, that he should go, he wants him to go out and speak and teach others. Now he was a shy boy and he wasn't interested. He said, it's not for me, it's my brother's a speaker, this one's a speaker, that one's a speaker. And his teacher says to him, he says to him, his leader, his mentor, misplaced humility is rooted in arrogance. In other words, there's arrogance where people want to be leaders simply because they want power, they want influence, they want to make a name for themselves, and so on. But there's also leadership that comes from a humble place. It's not about you and your comfort zone. Just like it's not about you in self-aggrandizement and making a name for yourself, it's also not about you to be silent and retreat when you have something that you're capable of giving. So I want to say that in addition to talking about political leaders or other leaders, let's start with ourselves. Are you doing everything you can do to inspire, to empower, to lead in your small corner of the world, whether it's your workplace, whether it's your home, whether it's your community? So humility is not just not being out there. It also means sometimes being out there and being that living example. So, in sum, the answer is, I can't tell you if all political leaders are corrupt. Many are definitely corrupt. Many are definitely corruptible. That's for sure. But that does not mean there's no hope. The hope lies in the human spirit. If we see ourselves as just sophisticated animals, if we see ourselves as just self-interest driven machines, then there's not much hope. But since we also have another voice, the voice of the soul, the voice of transcendence, the voice that there's something more to life than you and me, and there's something more than just my needs, that allows for the concept of service, to really serve another and serve selflessly. Will there be a tinge? Will there be maybe more than a tinge of self-interest? So be it, as long as the service of the others is not corrupted. And that is definitely something we can hope for and we can pray for. But it's also something we can do. And that's speaking about this. Conversation is more important than you may know. When you and I speak about it, and we put it on, we text about it, and we discuss it, that opens the topic up to the light. As we all know, infections fester and grow in darkness. And the same thing is with every issue. Same thing with corruption. When we shine the light on it and we expose it, and we expose our standards and demands and expectations for something more, and we talk about it at our tables and in our conversations and at the water coolers and in our social media, that changes things. And today we have that power, the power to amplify a message so many times over because of technology. So let's use the technology to demand something that goes beyond technology, and that is a heart and soul. A heart and soul of the human being, heart and soul of a leader. Because that's where the battleground is. Who will control the hearts and souls of our next generation? Who will control the heart and soul of our children? And perhaps it will be you that will educate and nurture a child that will have that perfect combination of humility and leadership that is so direly needed in our desperate times. Because on one hand, we have tremendous success and prosperity, so many comforts, but we need that leadership. We need people who stand up and you say to them, wow, we're not talking about perfect people, we're talking about accountable people. Because trust is built on accountability, not on perfection. Accountable people who know how to speak about something, and also you feel it's not just words, not just some canned speech, some loaded argument, but rather something that's coming from a place that touches us all to help us lead into the next generation. There are plenty of challenges. So may we see that in our lifetime and expect more and demand more, and then we'll get some of it at least. Thank you so much. Simon Jacobson here, talking about corruption and leadership. It's always an honor and a pleasure, even talking about topics that sometimes are a little depressing, but the goal is obviously to find the silver lining and the light at the end of the tunnel to be able to experience something truly transcendent. So here we are. Simon Jacobson of Meaningful Life Center. MeaningfulLife.com is our website. Please subscribe to our growing YouTube channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your feedback. And please share. Ripple effect, butterfly effect of getting this message to as many people as possible. Thank you so much. Be blessed and be well.